Returnal was first unveiled in June of 2020. The trailer managed to succinctly outline the game's premise while remaining vague enough to maintain a level of intrigue. The idea was easy to get behind. Celine crash lands on Atropos, a constantly changing planet, and it's HouseMarque making a game with a more AAA scope while maintaining the spirit of high-octane action that HouseMarque's other games had always been known for. So let's see what one of the first truly next-gen games on the PS5 has to offer.
I've crashed on Atropos. I survived, but Helios did not. Suit status operational, but my sidearm is missing. I'm leaving comms open.
Returnal is a high-octane action, roguelike third-person shooter. The action is as fast and frantic as one would expect from a HouseMarque game. The systems at play in this game all flow together nicely. The variety of weapons, buffs, equipment, and other items all play nicely together when fighting through the biomes of Atropos and its vicious wildlife. Most of the weapons in this game feel great to use. There are 10 weapons spread across the 6 biomes, with a few unlocking each time you get to a new area. The pistol is what you always start off with, and can potentially be pretty viable if you find a good one late in the run. There's also the typical kind of weapons that you would expect, like an assault rifle and shotgun type of equivalent, as well as some more off-color weapons like a gun that launches a cloud of poison and does a damage over time effect, or the pylon driver, which shoots pikes into or around enemies and shocks them. I was partial to the assault rifle and shotgun type weapons for a lot of my playtime, but I started to really take a shine to the Hollow Seeker towards the end, which is like a light machine gun type of weapon that homes in on whatever you're shooting at. Once you progress so far into a run, the weapons will start getting traits. Traits are buffs or extra effects to the gun in question. A lot of them seemed to pop up on multiple guns, like serrated projectiles, which is an effect that adds extra damage over time on top of the initial weapon damage. But there were also weapon-specific traits, such as the phasing rounds for the Hollow Seeker, which let the projectiles pass through walls. The further along into a run you would get, the more traits you could find on a single weapon. Getting a gun with a nice set of traits can be a real game changer late in the game. The portal turret on the Hollow Seeker or the leech rounds on the carbine were two that I always sought after and would be very hard-pressed to part with once I got one. Alt fires and consumables were also helpful in a pinch, but not nearly as game-changing as the weapon traits. My favorite alt fire was probably the tracking swarm. Just dedicating one of those to a larger enemy always made them way less of a chore. The lightning surge was also pretty cool. Consumables such as the damage siphon and obolite siphon were helpful for getting health back in an emergency, and nullification spheres were great for mitigating the risk on malignant items. The final two pieces of the loadout puzzle of Returnal are the parasites and the artifacts, which function similarly but have a key difference. Artifacts can be found at fabricators and are usually purchased with obolites, but sometimes can be found as freebies. Artifacts typically buff Celine without any sort of drawback. The astronaut figure allows you to die once without having to reset your run. There's one that has a leeching effect where damaging an enemy will give you health back. There's the resin enhancer that makes the requirements for upgrading Celine's health easier to achieve. The list goes on. The parasites have a similar function, but the key difference is that they come with some form of drawback. So for example, the constricting slow stitch parasite would regenerate your health a small amount anytime that it goes into critical condition, but you would take damage anytime you pick up an item. I quite like the parasites as a mechanic because the give and take made me assess my gameplay style and be aware of how I would change it up if I needed to. Getting a parasite that increases the chance of suit malfunctions was always an easy one for me to take, because it was very simple for me to stop opening the purple chests that would trigger the malfunctions in the first place. Progressing through Returnal was an interesting experience for me. I found that I was building myself up more for incremental goals rather than trying to make myself strong enough for the run I was on to be the one that takes me all the way. One reason for this is after you clear a biome, usually by beating a boss, you're given a permanent key or piece of equipment that lets you pass straight on to the next area. In fact, after you clear Biome 2, you receive an item that lets you pass straight from Biome 1 to Biome 3. So you only ever need to go back to an area if you think the payoff in weapons or buffs is something that you would find to be worth it. For me, it settled into a pattern of building myself up to be strong enough to defeat the boss of the area, and then trying to live long enough through the next area to find the next goal that I would be building myself up for. The hard part was staying alive long enough to feel like I was adequately prepared to take on whatever challenge it was that I was facing.
I have found a deceased Astra Scout here. Checking identification on helmet. It's...
The setup for Returnal's story is as follows. Celine, a space explorer of some variety, was following the distress signal called White Shadow. Following the signal causes her to crash land on the planet Atropos, which is constantly changing, and now she's been caught in a cycle where every time she dies, she's returned to the site of the crash. By the time the player takes control of Celine, this appears to have happened several times already. One of the first things that will happen is Celine finding her own dead body. From there, the game cryptically drip feeds more details about a number of things, such as Celine's past, the society that used to exist on Atropos, and just what is the White Shadow signal that Celine was following. The game does a good job at cultivating a level of intrigue and playing with a lot of cool psychological and even a touch of cosmic horror themes. However, I feel like for all of the intrigue that Returnal sets up, some of the payoff comes up short. Now, Returnal's story is certainly one that leaves a lot open for interpretation, so this could be attributed to me not having all of the information or misinterpreting some details, but I feel like I was paying a fair amount of attention to all the information that the game was presenting to me, and by the end I still had a lot of question marks hanging over my head. Still, I enjoyed learning more about Atropos and Celine enough for the story to be a cool supplement to the already enjoyable gameplay loop. Returnal looks fantastic. All of the environments on Atropos are varied as well as quite atmospheric. The first two biomes juxtapose each other quite nicely. The first one is a constantly rainy forested area that's rather gloomy but could still be filled with life. The second area, by contrast, is a red and orange wasteland that looks like any life that used to be there had been long since snuffed out. I won't go into detail on the rest of the areas, but they were also delights to look at. The creature designs are appropriately varied as well. They all seem very much like they were products of the environments of the biomes that they inhabited. Since Returnal is one of the first truly next-generation exclusives on the PS5, DualSense integration is something I have to talk about. I should specify before I start that if the haptic voodoo that the DualSense likes to do is not your thing, it can be adjusted or shut off entirely. As for how Returnal uses the haptics, oh doctor, if this is how PlayStation exclusives use the controller going forward, I am quite jazzed about it. Firstly, the adaptive triggers do a great job of adjusting for each gun that you can pick up, so it makes them feel different in your hands as well as different to how you'd be playing with them. And on the L2 button, you can push in the trigger halfway to do the typical aim closer to the enemy kind of thing that you would expect, but pushing it down all the way is what gives you your alt fire. This particular implementation isn't super mind-blowing on its own, but the idea that developers can now get more mileage out of the buttons on the controller is pleasing. Aside from how it affects control, the DualSense also does wonders for the immersion. The example that sticks out the most to me is how it will mimic rainfall in the first biome if you're standing out in the open. It was a very cool detail. There were a bunch of other neat details, such as the futuristic whoosh that the controller would make anytime you would step on a transporter, or the beep and vibration it would make to let you know that your alt fire was ready to use again. Returnal's exhilarating action meshes well with its roguelike structure to create a wonderful gameplay package that I would certainly give my recommendation to. The only things that some may take umbrage with are the length of its runs and the lack of saving in the middle of a run, but those issues were not enough to stop me from enjoying the satisfying gameplay or the cool atmosphere. Overall, it's probably the most fun I've had so far with a game release this year, and if this is what's on offer at the start of the console generation, I am very excited to see what's to come.